Am I the a-hole for telling my stepmom I'm not donating blood to her husband? Hi 22 female, know you're supposed to be there for your parents in old age, but sometimes things just don't turn out how they're supposed to. I wish it were better, but it's not, and that's just how life is. My dad, 46 male, has been dealing with leukemia for a while. When he was younger, he had problems with his health. My dad and I stopped having a relationship because of his divorce from my mom. I guess he woke up one day and decided he didn't have to be a father. If my siblings and I wanted to go to his house to spend time with him, he would tell us he was spending time with his real family. Mind you, we were kids, and our own father said this. I was honestly glad he left, because he's an abusive and manipulative man who always wants his way. Every woman he's been with was abused. After the divorce, we heard nothing from him. I had to beg him to step up, but as I got older, I stopped expecting him to be there for me. People love to start fresh. My dad has a 2-year-old daughter that I don't see much of. He got into a relationship with his affair partner, but they ended up parting ways. That's when he met Stacy, but from what he told me, he had already known Stacy while he was still married to my mom. He was cheating on my mom with many women. I recognized that there was no point in having a real relationship with him. They were happy with their life. Since my dad is in the hospital, that means he can't provide much, so Stacy is struggling to pay the bills and buy groceries for her daughter. Stacy called me for a big favor, and it was something hard to answer. She asked if I could donate my blood because my dad and I might be a match and possibly even get a bone marrow transplant. It was a very big favor to ask out of the blue. I felt obligated to give a truthful answer, right? That's what I did. I told her no, and that she would have to find another option. I think that's what triggered her to call me an a-hole. It was a heavy moment. She was crying and yelling at me, and I couldn't get a word out. Am I the a-hole? Now for the top comments. Answer: I might consider donating to family, but as your husband has stated, I'm not his family. Not the a-hole. This right here, I was coming to give that exact same answer. You haven't been a priority for a long time, and he himself said that you weren't family. The end. Not the a-hole. This is called consequences of your own actions. Not the a-hole. She wouldn't have reached out to you if your dad wasn't sick. He made his bed with her, and now the both of them can lay in it. I wouldn't feel guilty at all telling them no. Not the a-hole. It's clear your father gaslighted you and your siblings. He made the decision to break things off, and now he has to deal with the consequences. You're not obligated to donate blood because he doesn't think you're part of his family. I don't think what the father did is gaslighting. He straight up told them he wanted nothing to do with them. Next story. Am I the a-hole for standing up for my mom against my dad and saying he has no right blaming her for making sure her kids are okay when my half-sibling could die and my step-siblings are suffering? 4 years ago, my parents broke up because my dad cheated and got another woman pregnant. Dad moved in with his mistress and her kids, and mom moved out of the family house into something she could better afford to maintain with 3 kids. My dad and his mistress had some rough stuff going on. My half-brother was born with multiple complications, and he was in the NICU for months. He requires all this specialized care. My parents divorced during the NICU stuff, and it was pretty tense. My dad hated that mom didn't pause the divorce so he could focus on bigger things. Because of the affair and everything, I, 16 female, have been pretty mad at my dad. I feel let down by him and ashamed of him. I never cared much about bonding with the mistress, now his wife, my step-siblings, or my half-brother. I went to his house every other week while I was ordered to, and then every other weekend when mom was able to get his time with me reduced. Dad's house struggles because of my half-brother's needs, and my dad tried to get out of child support because of it, but the court still made him pay, though he got it reduced a little. Life at mom's is way better because of all that, and it shows even more for my siblings, 14 and 13, because they're in the same grade as 2 of our step-siblings, and things get compared. That's been a bigger issue lately. My dad can't afford to pay for things like field trips or other activities, but my mom can, so my siblings and I still get to do those things. And because we're at dad's house less, he can't stop it. But two of his stepkids know when my siblings can do things that they can't. And Dad had asked Mom to let him stop paying child support for a while because of a surgery my half-brother needed. And he wanted my mom to cover the cost of the field trips for my step-siblings so they could go too, and wouldn't feel bad knowing we got to do those things. He said that if Mom couldn't do that, then he wanted her to not let us go either. I think this talk happened in September. And since then, there have been a few experiences my siblings got to do that my step-siblings didn't. Mom refused to stop providing for us, but she also refused to cover expenses for our step-siblings. Then in November, my half-brother was brought to the hospital, and he still hasn't come out. My step-siblings were worried and depressed about it, and they were being teased at school for missing out on things with the rest of their class. So my dad went to Mom for help again, and she said no again. My half-brother's grandparents were visiting and asked my dad and his wife to take the weekend off from being at the hospital, so they stayed home. It was our weekend at Dad's, so we were there, and my dad was complaining to his wife about my mom, how petty, selfish, and evil she was for taking the affair out on my step-siblings. He said my half-brother could die this time, and she still couldn't do a single thing to help with the step's suffering, even though it wouldn't be anything huge. His wife called my mom something nasty in response and basically said, "F your mom." My dad said he found it hard to remember what he saw in Mom because she was so evil and cruel. I listened to them for about 10 minutes before confronting my dad and calling him out on what he said. I stood up for my mom and told him he had no right to blame her for making sure her kids were okay, taken care of, and had what they needed and even wanted. I reminded him that my mom only has 3 kids, and that his stepkids and his son are nothing to her. It doesn't matter if the steps are suffering or if my half-brother could die. They're not her responsibility. I told him if he didn't like that, then he shouldn't have cheated. My dad got really angry and we argued for about an hour. His wife was trying to argue, but she was ignored completely. Then her youngest from before Dad, who's like 7 or 8, started crying, so she went to check on her kids. But my dad and I really got into it. He told me I picked a freaking awful time to try and make him feel like crap. He asked if I didn't see how serious this was. He said my concern should be for my half-brother, not my mom right now, but my siblings and I don't seem to care if he lives or dies. He said our step-siblings care, but we don't. Then he told me that defending my mom while he's in pain is wrong, and fighting him on her behalf just proves what a child I still am. My siblings and I went back to Mom's early because of the fight. Am I the a-hole? Your father is a monumental a-hole and a POS, and an idiot. He fooled around and wants to act victim because he is finding out the consequences of his cuntish behavior. His F-buddy affair partner needs to keep your mom's name out of her mouth and get her baby daddy to pay for her kids. Nobody owes him anything. He had a legal responsibility to pay child support for you and your siblings. Your mother has no business with his wife or her kids, or his cheating butt, beyond making sure he pays child support, and she gets you to his house on his scheduled custody days. Your mom is a superstar for raising such a well-grounded and mature young person. Definitely not the a-hole. Funny how he obligated himself to his mistress's children, but now his own are a financial burden. He's absolutely disgusting. Many years ago, I had a psych professor tell our human sexuality class that by and large, men only take care of the household where they're getting laid. I've seen that play out time and time again in real life, and especially here on Reddit. Not the a-hole. Keep defending your mom. Your father made his bed, and he will have lie in his bed of bad choices. My philandering father's life went downhill when his kids refused to attend his pity parties about how bad his life was after the divorce. My father cleaned us dry, yet he forgets that he left with all the cash, and my mom and us kids almost went homeless because he took all the money. Stick with your mom, and just remind your father he made his bed with his own bad choices. I'm so sorry you went through that. It sucks when parents act like crappy people and then expect everything to be normal. Next story. Am I the a-hole for reminding my brother he chose his son's therapist and he needs to stop blaming me when I'm helping him? My 13-year-old nephew came to live with me in December. This is a temporary arrangement, but we're not sure how long he'll be here. My husband and I will keep him for as long as it takes. But I'll be honest, I could see him staying for years. The reason he's here is that he's full of anger about his dad, my older brother, remarrying 18 months ago. My nephew feels like his dad's stepkids get more of his time, attention, and love than he does, and that has turned into hatred for his step-siblings, 5 and 6. In December, he unleashed all that anger on the kids and yelled at them. He told them he hated them, wished they would die, so he could have his dad back, and said any number of other things. My brother had taken his focus off his son a lot after remarrying and was shocked by the outburst. Calming my nephew down took hours because after he finished yelling at the kids, he started yelling at his dad. My sister-in-law attempted to step in, but my nephew yelled at her too, and then went back to yelling at his dad. It was the first time my brother realized his son was angry. I hadn't seen them since my brother's wedding, but this was a big change. My nephew had mixed emotions on the day of the wedding, and we talked about it, but he wasn't angry. In the months that followed, that anger became a concern, and my brother didn't see it. After talking to my nephew when he was calmer, my brother realized more outbursts were going to happen. This led him to reach out and ask if my husband and I could let my nephew stay for a while. He was honest that he didn't know how long, but he didn't want to send his stepkids packing, nor did he want my nephew to feel like this was the end of the marriage and that it would go back to just the two of them. So he didn't want to move out with him. I told him that, assuming he arranged for therapy and everything else, that was fine. My brother sends a weekly amount to cover my nephew's expenses. My brother set up a therapist for him where I live. We're a couple of hours apart, and my nephew is doing school virtually right now. My brother drives out to see him once a week and joins him for therapy some weeks. But he's not happy with what the therapist is saying. He confronted me about it and tried to blame me for the choice of therapist and for the fact that therapy wasn't a quick fix. He asked what good it was doing if my nephew was here and in therapy, but not improving. He asked what kind of therapist I was bringing him to. Those were the kinds of comments he made. I reminded him that he chose the therapist and that I was helping him, so he needed to stop blaming me. My brother told me there wasn't another option, no matter what others might think. That makes me believe the therapist suggested something he disagreed with. But my brother left angry, and a couple of days later, he called me and told me I didn't need to turn on him when he had no freaking clue what to do, and was still coming to terms with the fact that his son hates him and hates innocent kids who did nothing wrong. Am I the a-hole? Now for the top comments. So he remarried, shows more love to his stepkids, doesn't see the resentment in his own child, the child blows up, and he sends him away. Wow, your brother is a bit of a prick. Yes, and sends him away because he said he needs to protect his stepkids. The best thing you can do is what you're already doing. Support your nephew unconditionally and do your best to get your brother to take accountability. That poor kid. Your brother is a massive POS who is abandoning his child for the sake of a new wife and step family. Is the boy's mother around, or is she dead? If so, OP's best option is to attempt to adopt her nephew, if that is possible, because it is clear that his dad is useless. My nephew's mom died when he was 1. Therapy isn't magic, and it doesn't provide instant solutions. Your brother needs to accept that this is a long process and stop making you the scapegoat for his parenting mistakes. This is all on your brother. He chose his D over actually communicating with his child. It's actually kind of worse than that, because he has presented it as needing to protect his stepkids from my nephew turning on them more. So it's more of my nephew hearing him putting them first. Last story. Am I the a-hole for asking my dad why his new stepkid's safety is my problem? My dad, male 47, got married to Deb, female 40, a few months ago. I, male 17, live with my grandparents, just like my dad did before he moved in with Deb and her kids, male 15, female 11, female 10, and male 7. I didn't move with my dad because I didn't want to uproot my life again, which we did a lot after my mom died, and I didn't want to deal with the headache that is Deb's oldest son. I don't know all the specifics of Deb's son's issues, but I know he has a caseworker and Deb gets all these services for him. To summarize everything, He has anger issues that make him violent and issues with the authority that make him violent. He doesn't like school and doesn't want to sleep. He'd prefer to stay up playing video games all night and doesn't like when that can't happen. He doesn't want anyone in his space, and he's really territorial about everything. I met him like 6 or 7 times before I said screw it and refused to go meet up with him. He basically terrorizes his younger siblings and his mom. My dad's being terrorized now too. Ever since the wedding, my dad has tried talking me into moving in with them. I told him no way. He asked me why I didn't want to live with him, and I told him I wasn't dealing with Deb's mess of a family. He said they're our family now too, and I told him they're his. He chose that, but they'll never be mine, and there's nothing he'll say to change my mind about it. He told me they could really use me in the house, that I could be a huge asset for the other kids, bond with them and help keep them safe. He said their safety is a big concern right now, and Deb is trying to fight for her older son's right to get a placement for some kind of help, instead of just being thrown into some other kind of system that's not helpful and makes kids like him worse. He told me I have a duty to help the younger members of my family stay safe. I asked him why that was my duty, and why I thought his new stepkid's safety was my problem. I said I really don't feel obligated to keep them safe. He signed up for it. I didn't, and I won't sign up for it. Dad told me this is the kind of problem we take on when we become a family. I reminded him again that they're not my family. He made them his, and I'm choosing not to make them mine. He said that means he and I aren't family too. And I said if that's how he takes it, then yeah. He said he was disappointed in me for dismissing the safety of his stepkids. I told him I was disappointed he wanted to put me in that position to begin with, so we can stay disappointed with each other. Am I the a-hole? No, his crazy stepson is not your responsibility. You made the right decision staying at your grandparents'. You have no obligation to his new family. You're almost a legal adult. Go live your life and do not get pulled into the disaster that your father signed up for. He sounds like he wants you to help him navigate this new burden and be some co-parent to these kids. Run. I think Dad wants OP to be a distraction for the stepson so he'll leave the other kids alone. That is despicable. So your dad thinks you should step up and be the superhero in a sitcom where he's the lead? I mean, who knew family dynamics came with a side of, don't let the stepkids eat your snacks? What OP's dad really wants is a new punching bag for his stepson, so he leaves the other children alone. Yep, Dad wants to intentionally put his bio son, OP, in harm's way, so he doesn't have to deal with the issues of the stepson. OP should never allow himself to be used as a meat shield and move in there. OP is not the a-hole, but Dad is a despicable excuse for man for wanting to place his son in this situation so Dad can get his knob polished.